Hey, it's Pastor John here with Corumdale Church. We are in the middle of a series on the book of Ephesians. We've landed in Ephesians chapter 5, and we're dealing with marriage, and we've been asking people to submit questions regarding marriage that we will either address in sermons or address through videos such as these. So I'm going to take a brief moment to read a question and try to address it in a way that's helpful. The question says from last week's text, so this would have been actually 2 weeks ago. Could you clarify what it means for that the husband is the head of the wife, and the wife is to be subject to her own husband? How is this manifested? The verbiage, the language in Ephesians 5 can be difficult to deal with in terms of headship and submission or respect, in part because of the way those have been abused, and part of it is the cultural values that are attached to those words. And so let me just try and draw a broad picture biblically, and then maybe that will help. When God creates Adam in the garden in Genesis chapter 2, God says it's not good for Adam to be alone. God has given Adam this vocation of bearing his image to the world. It's an expression of his identity as an image bearer. He's to take care of things, he's to tend things, and he's supposed to be a representation of God, a flesh and blood representation of God on the earth. And when he creates Adam, and yet Adam is without sin, God says it's not good for him to be alone. And that tells us a lot about the relationship between Adam and Eve and between husbands and wives. That Adam has unique gifts, but he doesn't have every gift. And Adam is incomplete in and of himself. The image of God is displayed through Adam and Eve together. And Adam has needs. He has weaknesses, and he needs Eve. And Eve has strengths that she can contribute, so that Adam and Eve together form one whole picture or representation of God's image on the earth. And so starting there shows us, it helps us understand that there's equality. Adam and Eve are both image bearers of God. Adam and Eve need one another. Adam and Eve both have strengths and both have weaknesses, and it's when they come together that there's a whole display or representation of God's image on the earth. And so we need to start there in terms of equality, and start there in terms of there's a mutual need between Adam and Eve, so that we don't start thinking that Adam is superior or that Eve is inferior, but rather they're meant to be together. Now, the question is, how do these two work together? Years ago, my wife and I took some dance lessons. One of the first things that we had to learn was that there needed to be a leader. In order for two people to dance together, one of them has to leave. And so traditionally, the male fills this role and creates kind of a frame that then the female clings onto. And it's through his initiating or his leadership that the dance is able to be beautiful out as it was intended. And that's that's similar to what Paul is getting at in Ephesians chapter 5, that husband and wife display God's image together, each uniquely having strengths and also having weaknesses, that they need one another. But in that relationship, there's somebody who's initiating. And so the initiating piece, excuse me, is a role that's played by the husband. And the word is qualified, the word headship is qualified in Ephesians 5, because as soon as it says that the man is the head, it points the husband to the cross and says, this is what headship looks like. Headship isn't about bossing anybody around. Headship isn't even as much about leadership in the way that we think about it, but more of leadership in a biblical context, in a way that Jesus defines and embodies for us, which is self-sacrificing love. In 1 Peter chapter 5, it talks about elders and pastors who are leading the church, that they serve sacrificially. You see through the Gospels that Jesus really tries to deconstruct this authoritarian idea of leadership, and what he models is servant leadership. And so when we say, or when Scripture talks about the husband being the head, or we talk about a man playing an initiating role in a marriage, it's not the role of boss. It's the role of servant, the one who sacrifices himself, who lays himself down for the sake of his wife. The model of headship in marriage is the cross. And so that's what the Bible's going after. That's what the Apostle Paul is going after when he talks about the man being the head, that there's an initiating role, there is a leadership role in which he leads by example, and he leads through self-sacrifice, not through authority and barking out orders, but through humble, selfless self-sacrifice. So that's the role of the husband. And then to the wives, Paul is saying, respect that, acknowledge that, cooperate with that. And I think what that looks like in real life is much tamer than what it sounds, because it's easy to read the text and think that what Paul is saying is the husband always has the answer and the wife needs to do what the husband says, which is absolutely not true. There should always be this partnership. There's clearly equality and dignity and value. Clearly, Adam needed Eve, and every husband needs his wife. There's a mutual dependency there. But there are going to be times where there are disagreements on major things. And it's in those moments, which are not the majority of the moments, but in some of those moments where there's disagreement, the model that we fall back to is the model of husband as head and wife respecting. And I think what that looks like when it's played out in real life is really a beautiful thing. A husband that is always trying to die for his wife, always trying to love her, always trying to serve her, always trying to put her first in everything. And a wife that is acknowledging that and honoring that and respecting that in her husband is really a beautiful picture. That's what relationships ought to look like. And it's going to be the rare occasion where there's a conflict in which respecting the husband is going to require the wife to maybe go in a direction that wouldn't have been her first choice. So I think day to day, it looks like self-sacrificing love on the husband's part, and a wife who is respectful of that and honoring that. And in moments of conflict, it defaults back to the man initiating. In every decision that the husband makes needs to be for the well-being of the wife. And so when there's a disagreement, the nature of it should be that the husband is wanting more for his wife than his wife is wanting for herself. And those are the types of conflicts that are actually healthy. And so the model is self-sacrifice. The model is the cross. And what that looks like worked out day to day, we don't get to have those details because that's going to look different for every family, but we do have the principles of initiating and self-sacrificing leadership. So that may not be as specific as you wanted, but I hope that that's helpful in terms of shaping the discussion for you in the future. Thanks a lot for asking, and look forward to seeing you on Sunday.